Welcome to America's Heroes Group.
Today is Saturday, August 5th, 2023. August is National Wellness Month. Our host is Kelley. I'm Sean Claiborne, the co-host. Our executive producer is Glenda Smith, who's not with us today, and also not with us is digital media producer Ivan Ortega from Scouts Honor Productions. But we do have Lady Shakai in the studio today, being our engineer and also holding things down on the studio board. This is America's Heroes Group. You're coming from Kaiser Health News. We're not Gigi Crowder. You are Colleen DeGuzman. You actually are the Peggy Girshman Fellow based in Austin, Texas, and reporter with the Austin American-Statesman. Is that correct?
Yes.
Right. My apologies.
I was formerly at the Statesman. No worries.
Yeah, we have another person coming on our show, Gigi Crowder. I thought that was going to be you for a second, but that we're going to talk about. As far as what you're talking, we want to talk about what that goes is another topic, but very important nonetheless. And that is what is going on with the heat stroke and heat issues with people that are working outside in the hot weather. I know in San Antonio that today it's 104 degrees. That's supposed to be the high for today, according to the National Weather Service. This week in San Antonio is going to be at least 104 degrees every day between Saturday and next Friday. But there is legislation in Texas, from what I understand, correct me if I'm wrong, that will take away mandatory water breaks.
And that'll be effective on September 1st.
So how did this come about, and what's behind all this? Why would it be necessary, or why would it be advisable to limit water breaks? And tell us about some of the details of your story when it comes to what people are fighting for to try to get this changed and what workers are going through in Texas.
So there is no statewide ordinance that regulates how often people are guaranteed and granted a water break. And so over the years, there's certain cities across the state that have put in place these ordinances that grants people at least 10 minutes for a water break every 4 hours. So the city of Austin passed theirs in 2010, and the city of Dallas in the Fort Worth area passed theirs in 2015. And it was actually inspired by a really tragic story of a man named Rodney Granillo, who in 2015, he's a construction worker in the Fort Worth area, and he was helping build a home, and he was laying out the floorboards of a home that he was building. And since the wooden floors have a lot of chemicals, he had to wear extra layers of protection. And his company also didn't have the proper protection for his face. So to protect their face, his sister told me that he would wrap a lot of towels around his nose and his mouth. So it was just a lot of extra fabric around him. And on July 19th in 2015, he was feeling a little sick, and he asked for a water break, and they told him to hold off for a few more minutes. And he passed out, and he died on the way to the hospital.
Wow.
And so after that, that's when the city of Fort Worth passed an ordinance granting and guaranteeing people who work outside water breaks. But the way that our governor worded this bill, it's called the Texas Consistency Act. And since over the years these patchworks of ordinances have been passing, he basically said, we would like for there to be a statewide ordinance or none at all. And this was inspired by a lot of businesses not liking the fact that there were different rules in different areas of the state, that in one area, in one city, they had to guarantee it, and in others they don't. And so since there is no statewide mandate, that's how it became a water ban break.
So to me, it seems like, and this from experience personally and also with the military life, because even in the military, we have regulations about working outside in the heat. You have what's called heat categories, and it goes from heat category 1 to heat category 5. You change your dress and then change your behavior based on the heat that's out there. 104 degrees today in San Antonio. That's supposed to be the high today. that's also the temperature. If your body reaches that temperature, which is also 40 degrees Celsius, you can go into heat stroke. Heat stroke begins at 104 degrees. It's going to be that hot outside all week long. So
And I'm
is 10 minutes
actually
even
in the
enough?
Rio Grande Valley right now in South Texas. I'm visiting my family, and it's really hot. You feel it on your skin when you're outside, when you step into the car. And I can't imagine having to work outside on roofs and to have to work on highways, construction without water.
Wow, and it seems just cruel. Now, there's also national legislation that's being proposed to change this. Now, how is that going to? Where is that leading right now, and how could that affect and hopefully ameliorate this problem?
So the last time I spoke to Representative Greg Gassad, he's the one who coordinated that protest that my story is about on the steps of the Capitol. He said that he had high hopes that the president is going to push for a nationwide rule. And it would seem like there was one already. So he was saying that he does have hope that OSHA will be able to push one out soon.
Now, I'm surprised that OSHA didn't address this. This wasn't something that was at the federal level through OSHA guidelines that regulate a lot of different things. And then also, too, from the perspective, I mean, oftentimes when people suffer heat stroke, which is a very serious issue, and we have more of it happening because the climate, unfortunately, for the last 20 years, the summers are getting hotter and hotter and hotter. So with that being said,
and when we think of heat, of course we do think about heat strokes and the people, because there are people in Texas who are dying of heat strokes. But another concern that I have is how much the heat limits people from walking around and doing their daily exercises and having to just stay inside. My family's in McAllen, Texas, and it's hard to be outside. We can't walk outside when the sun's out. We usually walk outside when the sun's already down, and it's tough to get your physical exercise in when you're in the area, and that just leads to so many more chronic diseases such as obesity and diabetes, and that's very prominent in the Rio Grande Valley. And when people think of diabetes and obesity, it's easy to blame the decisions people make on what they eat and their food choices and their diet choices. But it's such a bigger picture than that. I live in DC now, and it's been so different being able to walk to places and to walk to my grocery store and walk back. And it's those small steps that really do add up to a healthier lifestyle and really do end up adding years to your life later on. And this heat is just so difficult to work with with regulations also that take away your right to a water break.
Well, water is so critical to staving off heat stroke. That's one of the things you learned in the military, because when you're training in some of them, most bases are in very hot areas around the country, usually in the South. And I remember being in South Carolina at Fort Jackson, being out in Columbia, South Carolina. You're above your normal elevation. So you're closer to the sun because you're up on a hill basically, and it's not a lot of cover. You're out sometimes in sandy areas, and the heat's just beaming down on you. It could be 110 degrees in the shade. And then some of the terrible effects that heat stroke and heat exhaustion can lead to, talking about liver failure, kidney failure, brain swelling, nerve damage, and then if that doesn't lead to a heart attack and you don't die from heat stroke, it can lead to permanent damage in those areas. So the idea of limiting water to people that are working, not just outdoors, but even in some of these warehouses and facilities. You have a lot of UPS that had a strike recently, or not strike, but they had a threatened strike that would have happened this month, because one of the things that they were concerned about, no air conditioning inside the driver's vans or vehicles, getting 140 degrees in the back of a brown truck, and people passing out on doorsteps because of the heat. They're baking in this truck, and then they're bacon when they try to walk out of the truck to go deliver a package, and then they're dropping dead on people's doorsteps right after they ring the doorbell. You know, then your story, you mentioned the young man that it was 26 when he passed away.
Yeah.
And then also, and they said his
just
organs
26.
were cooked. His organs were actually cooked.
Mhm.
Wow. So what's the likelihood, you think, of something really changing in Texas? Because it seems very much driven by profit. Although the guise of it, I've read the asset fact sheet that was put out. Asset was, I guess, the business communities in that area. They're the people who push for this, who are concerned about all the different varied regulations and things like that. And there was a lot of talk and a lot of concern about, for small businesses, having too much regulation that stifles business production and also makes it hard for business to thrive because of the fact they have to keep up so many regulations, and they're different from different areas to different towns and different governing bodies and things like that. It does make sense to have a more cohesive and more streamlined regulation process. However, my concern is that why would you limit water breaks? You know, and to me, honestly, and I can't remember to give you exactly what I experienced when I was in South Carolina in Fort Jackson, going through training, because that was almost 20 years ago. But it seemed like we had to break at least once an hour. So 10 minutes. I mean, you need the research and studies show right now that when you're working, it's not healthy to work 4 hours straight. You should at least once an hour, you should be getting up and doing something for 10 minutes, taking a break, walking around. If you're even doing something as innocuous as sitting in an office, typing on a computer, you should be getting up and moving around for at least 10 minutes every hour.
Yes.
If you're out in 100-degree weather, or in a warehouse where it's 110 degrees inside of a warehouse, you need water more than once every 4 hours. You need really, like, taking a break every 10 minutes every
Once an hour. And I spoke to the nurse at the scene during the protest, and she was telling me that by the time you're parched and by the time you're already telling yourself that you're thirsty, you're way past the time you should have taken a sip.
Wow. No, that's really.
And to your question earlier, if it's up to the state to set a kind of regulation, I don't have much hope that that would be a priority in the upcoming legislative session, since this bill was born out of the governor's office, and it was meant to dissolve the current ordinances. We would have to rely on a national ordinance, a national rule that will set the time for people who work outside to get a water break and a shade break too. And I think it's also important to clarify that it's not a ban on water breaks necessarily. No one's going to tell a boss that they're not allowed to grant their employees a water break. So there is hope that there are some graceful and considerate bosses. I met some of them at the steps. There was a boss, there was one of the executives who is a director for an airport in Houston. He manages the team that moves the baggages from planes to planes. And he was stunned that this kind of bill would pass, but he understands the importance of water, and he's going to continue to allow his workers to decide for themselves when they are thirsty and when they need water. But it's difficult to rely on that kind of grace from people in power.
Right, and oftentimes when a worker is doing a job, sometimes they don't feel comfortable, say asking for, like the person that passed away in your story, asking for a break. But then, if they take too many breaks, will that affect their job? Will that affect their job security, or will they be looked at or just a different way? Maybe not given overtime because they're taking too many, quote unquote, too many breaks and things like that. Having a mandatory break And like I said, I advocate for once every hour. That's what I think that's what to me makes more logical sense, because given the choice, too many employers, even if it's a small minority, even a small minority of employers, that's too many that can be playing with people's lives when it comes to heat exhaustion, heat stroke. That is something that's very, very serious. That is something that can lead to death. That's something that can lead to permanent brain damage. You know, so things like that, when you're taking safety and health and safety into consideration, having a national standard where, yeah, you should, particularly in hot conditions and hot climates, you get a water break, a mandatory water break, 10 minutes every hour. You know, because, you know, somebody's speaking up to say they want to take a break.
It's also important to remember that when Granil passed away, it was in 2015, and summers have only gotten hotter. And the direction that we're going just isn't where you would expect it to be going with how extreme our weather has been getting. Wow.
And then part of I think the idea behind having, which I'm concerned about as well from the logistics of making it so that the city and local governments in the state of Texas can't regulate their own health and safety standards, because in your report you say that they actually limits their city and local cities in Texas will lose the authority to enforce local ordinances relating to agricultural, natural resources, finance, and labor. So if they can't regulate or enforce certain codes, does that mean then the state has to do that? And then does the state even have the manpower and resources to regulate even the codes that they're is in place? So is there going to be a watchdog making sure that whatever safety standards are still there are going to be upheld? Because in reality, the city and local governments do that.
Supporters of the bill and the representatives who co-authored it and who supports them, it's a lot of construction businesses, a lot of huge corporations that wanted this bill to get through.
And so I have to make that be the last word, because we just ran out of time. My apologies for getting mixed up with another segment. But we got to have you back to talk about this topic more if we can have you back in a future date. And also, anytime you write an article, please let us know. Kaiser Health News has this article on their website. Check it out. It is a great article. It is Texas activists thirst for a national heat standard to protect outdoor workers. See that at kffhealthnews.org. Also, you can see it on our Facebook link. This is America's Heroes Group. We'll be right back.